The priorities for science and innovation should be based on what's needed in the world rather than what's seen as potentially just interesting or something nice to know.
We need scientists to engage in what is one of the most difficult challenges facing poor people. How can they be helped to be better prepared, to be more resilient?
The real aim is to bring together the people who have the information and the people who want to use that information, so that through dialogue people can get access to information that will really change their lives.
I think it's important that both sides, the scientists understand the needs of the users and policy and decision makers understand the science.
Those two types of people, those two communities if you want, they do talk a completely different language.
There doesn't seem to be yet a sustained place where people can have this dialogue between the providers and users of weather information.
The very infrequent meeting of these two communities with each other might well be one of the major reasons why the messages don't get across from either side. It's
not that scientists are hiding information, or it's not that scientists are kind of playing games behind the scenes. They're actually doing, research on what is a complex problem.
There is so little money put into making climate science useful.
There is an imbalance in between the amount of money that's being spent on climate science on the one hand, and on the other hand on trying to understand how we can make the science more applicable and more applied.
These things cost. It's very difficult to get a policymaker, a practitioner, an academic and a user in the community all together.
It's quite remarkable the extent to which actually science can provide information as long as they know the kinds of information that people need.
The challenge of actually delivering a scientific message is often as great as the science itself. You can have the best and most technically advanced forecasts in the world, but if those aren't applied in the right ways, there's very little value in them.
What we do in the university or a different research organization is only research. It's not used by the Met Office or by the other sectors to taking their operational decision-making process.
We have to have a system whereby climate risks are well understood, the channels from the people generating the information, the climate scientists, right down to the people who might have to make a decision based on that information, are much, much better resourced and much clearer. That sort of channel needs to be properly resourced, it needs to be fully functional.
Unless you go to the society, you don't know actually what is their need, how they work, what their demand is.
There are a lot of researches separately, but they have to communicate and they have to come together to use the researches for the community needs.
The most difficult and most resource-intensive area is really working with local communities. You've got to spend time out there, so it means travel. It's all these kind of very practical issues that actually form a real barrier to this kind of engagement.
Yes, I think we definitely need more investment in this, but we're starting from a very low base, so I think it'd be I think it'd be very welcome to have much greater investment in this kind of knowledge transfer. Everybody wants things to be certain, and we almost as humans have an aversion to things being random, but we just have to face the fact that an awful lot of things just aren't predictable. As scientists working in this area, we're very conscious of the fact that people always tend to over-interpret forecasts as more definite than they are. And I think it's all of that that makes scientists so cautious about providing forecast information.
As a scientist, I actually don't go outside from my box. So I always inside my room doing my research. But if you go to the society, they are taking chances every year, every season. People are really dealing with these uncertainties.
Subsistence farmers in developing countries actually make quite sophisticated use of probabilities, so they can use uncertain information. They need to understand what that uncertainty is, what the nature of it is, and they also need to have confidence in the reliability of the uncertain information they're being given.
Decision makers, policy makers in particular, sort of don't like the idea that scientists can't provide them with precise, absolute, numbers. They tend to shy away from predictions that are essentially probabilistic in character. The scientists need to better communicate the uncertainties in their predictions and communicate them as quantitatively as they can. And in turn, the decision and policymakers need to develop decision tools that can really properly take account of these uncertainties.
Using that information consistently year after year, we will end up ahead of the game as compared to a situation of kind of complete ignorance where we assume that the likelihood of above or below average rainfall or whatever is the same every year.
Until we develop that understanding to act on forecast and act on risk, we're not going to be able to save as many lives as we could.
Events like this one are very useful because particularly the area of sort of understanding what the limitations are of climate forecasts and where we might be going, these are difficult things to communicate in just sort of dry reports, and so you've got to talk to people about them and where you might be going to get a feel for what's going on.
I think exposure to each of the silos, constituencies, whatever you want to call them, is a good thing, because then you get sort of breakdown of language. One word could mean something in one particular constituency, but it means something very different for another. And so understanding that kind of dynamic, I think, is crucial.
There is a whole incentive structure in the science community that is actually directed away from producing science that's useful to people.
The disciplines advance in their thinking to very sophisticated levels. But in order to have a dialogue with another group, you need to step back in your sophistication to a place where you can have that dialogue with the other group and then advance together to a new place.
It's quite clear from the work we do with our partners that there's a huge variety of skills and capacity in terms of understanding climate science. But we also have a lot of partners who are much more sort of focused at grassroots development, and they don't have the time, they don't have the human resources to actually understand the complexity of climate science in any other way than fairly sort of broad brush.
It's just this sort of initiative that helps break down the jargon that gives us comfort. So it's finding different ways both to talk to each other and to listen and understand the concerns of each side.
It involves a lot of uncertainty, and involves a lot of fear, if you like, in the participants, because they are required to go to a place they haven't been before.
Researchers don't always want to translate their research into useful findings. They have their peer-reviewed processes, and that's the way they're incentivised. The fact that HEFCE have now introduced impact, I think, is a good thing.
With the Research Excellence Framework, we're looking at the quality of the research that they do, but also what difference has it made to the outside world.
I help researchers to sort of think through what their impact could possibly be. A lot of the funding for research now is coming with an impact kind of tag.
I think we have to come clean. Sometimes we want to measure simply because we want to tell the public, the taxpayer, we're not wasting your money. And sometimes we want to measure because we want to learn. And sometimes we want to measure because we want to let those that we're working for, the beneficiaries eventually, that we're doing things in the right way. And these are different publics, and we need to understand why we're doing what we do. So asking an organization to assess impact, but to do it in a way that is convincing for the taxpayer, just creates complications.
I think there are different rationales for having impact associated with your research. I think we need to have better clarity on why do we measure impact, why do we think impact is important. And there's also personal motivation behind people who want to see that their research actually has a direct impact on the ground for individuals or for policy, and they want to see that the work they put in for their research does deliver results.
It's sometimes quite a shock when I go to developing world countries, and it makes you realise, my God, this is not just a row of grid points in some black box, this is the real world. So having that linkage, I think, is useful. It kind of motivates one's whole life and one's research agenda to really understand the importance that this type of science can make to ordinary people's lives, people that are desperately struggling under conditions of poverty and indeed the extremities that climate can bring.
opening up about things that have not been successful is extremely difficult, and I think we have to recognise that and think about mechanisms for learning and having conversations which don't censor certain kinds of failure but allow those conversations to happen.
If you look at our own individual learning processes, that is, we mostly learn from mistakes or near disasters, and that's what really makes the difference, that learning.
The way funding is provided creates incentives against being proud of having learned from failures. It tends to focus on success. Even the case studies that are required for the research excellence framework are about success rather than about failure, rather than about learning lessons. So yes, not enough effort is put into learning from failures.
If you aren't comfortable reporting research because you feel that your further work will be negatively affected by reporting failure, then you're not going to ever do so.
All the incentives, of course, are to demonstrate success, both in research and programmes, in order to generate new opportunities for funding. And yet we need an openness and understanding of failure. Events which we're working on to try and enable people to share these experiences, even if they don't want to share the light of publicity upon them, are very welcome and very important.
I think there's a lot of work to be done around valuing failure and those who are honest and open about it actually being seen as very productive and important stakeholders in this process. Ultimately, the hope is that you're all hoping to make things better for people on the ground and make it have a positive result. But we can't all do each other's jobs. We need to respect and value what each other do in that system and find ways to work more effectively together.
Academics will say, well, I put the paper out there and then it's for others to uptake. But then from the humanitarian and development side, if they can't understand it, they can't see the need for it or how to directly apply it to programme design and evaluation and impact methodologies.
I think there has been a silo between the thinkers and the doers, and I think both sides need to break those barriers and start talking and listening to each other.
There needs to be this kind of conversation, there needs to be something that allows people to come together to actually look at what's available, how it can be applied, and then start to develop the tools that are needed to create that collaboration.
We are absolutely in the business of bringing people together like we have today and cross-fertilising ideas, language and all that sort of activity.
You need people coming together to go, right, what science is available? So in East Africa you have seasonal forecasts that come from the regional climate outlook forums, you have FuseNet analysis, famine early warning system analysis, you have other bits of more scientific, academically sourced information that can come together with more community-based information to create indicators for early warning systems and early action. But only by looking at it in a really context-specific area and the specific information that is available from science in those areas can you start to have proper meaningful dialogue and meaningful steps forward to actually make that happen.
It's, I think, locking in both the scientific community, the policy makers, and most importantly, the practitioners and the affected communities. So it's going wider perhaps than those that have already learnt to talk to each other and creating a nexus of the survivors, their politicians, the humanitarian sector, and then scientists, both here in the north, but more importantly, supporting scientific endeavour in Africa, in Asia, in India or in South America.
We are all human beings. When you're able to give a provision or give him a chance to bring him to the society, take him down to the village, sitting with the villagers, it really changes mindset, and that helps him also do a better research work to help the humankind.
It is a long haul. This is a marathon, not a sprint, and we need to find these opportunities to talk and listen to each other.
There's so much potential that climate science can bring to humanity that I think a lot of the investment should be almost self-evident.